they call a festival of nummy nums.
Ash and Zach are super smart. They went to college and learned a bunch of stuff. And Bo and Andrew didn't go to college because that's just the way life goes sometimes. What happens when you put them together and you try to make them learn? Grab your friends, let's listen together on Get Dumped on an Info Dump podcast. Hey, welcome to Get Dumped On, the Infodump podcast, the only podcast that is, it's the only podcast. There's only one, and this is it.
Yeah, that's 100% true.
100%.
Yeah.
The podcast for everyone.
It's definitely not an oversaturated field.
You're fine. You're fine. Shut up. Yeah, the only one that matters.
The first one to ever find we invented podcasting.
Yeah.
It's true. Look it up. No, don't look it up.
Yeah, look up Google Podcast. You'll see my photo. Me.
It's truly just
When
awful.
Steve Jobs invented the podcast, he called us up and he said, these four are the ones who need to become the first podcasters.
He was eating a piece of fruit while he said it, too.
Idiot.
Or like a bell
Yeah.
pepper or whatever.
It's a shame
Anyway.
he couldn't make it to see his dream come true, but
That's his own fault for
Anyway,
getting cancer.
ignoring one of the
God.
he ignored one of the only treatable forms of pancreatic cancer. The doctor was like, if you start treatment now, you'll be fine. And he was like, fuck you, I'm smarter than you. I'm just gonna eat fruit, which will
he's
heal
like, I
me.
made an iPhone, dumbass.
Oh,
Have you ever heard of me? Have you seen my turtleneck?
And
Why
6
are we
months later, he was like,
I don't know.
I don't think that the fruit has cured me. And the doctor was like, well, now it's too late.
Well, you're not
Anyway,
eating
welcome to
dragon
Get Dumped On, the Infodump podcast.
Right.
The podcast where four friends get together and one of the hosts dumps their special interest knowledge on the other three.
Or we spend 12 minutes shitting on Steve Jobs.
For some reason. My name is Andrew. I am one of your hosts.
I mean, he deserves it.
Maybe. We're here for a doozy for you. My name is Andrew again. Hello. How you doing?
Hi.
That's my line.
Oh, sorry.
Don't steal my thunder.
Anyway, I'm the hostess with the mostest. My name is Andrew.
Son of a bitch.
Oh, he said the thing.
I am joined here by Bo.
Hey, it's me, the other hostess with the most. How you doing,
It's
bro?
true. He
Good.
is.
How you
It's
doing?
true. He is. God damn it. Also, Zach is here.
Hi, I don't want to introduce myself in a way that will rumple the rest of the podcast.
Rumple it.
Hey, I'm the hostess with the mostest.
And we're also joined here by Ash. Ash is going to be hosting us today. We have no idea what she is doing. So, Ash,
I know.
go ahead and take us away. And dump. You guys got to stop being married for a second.
Like when it's podcast time, you guys aren't married. Let's just go with that.
Yeah, just don't talk to each
Okay.
other.
Then when
Okay, got
clocking,
it.
when we're recording the podcast, you guys are back to being married.
Okay, got it.
Ash, I'm so sorry. Ash, what do you got for us today?
I'm the real hostess of the mostest today because I'm the one doing the hosting. I'm going to talk to y'all today about the Wars of the
But
Roses.
Are you doing the mosting?
I'm doing the mosting and I'm doing the hosting.
You said the War of the Roses?
I'm going to be talking to you about the Wars of the Roses.
I don't know what this is about, so I'm very excited.
So
Oh, I
we
hate
talked
fucking plants.
we talked about this a little bit briefly when we were doing the King Henry VIII episode.
Andrew, you're gonna
Um,
hate it. They're not actually fighting over flowers.
God damn it. I'm out.
I'll-
We're doing another fake war. God, why?
it's a very real war.
You know how much I love fighting over plants?
So we talked about it when we did the Henry VIII episode. This is the precursor in history to Henry VIII. So I gave you a little bit of
Prequel.
setup. So it's a prequel to the Henry VIII story. I also had talked about it in relation to its parallels to Game of Thrones.
Sick.
Because George R. R. Martin had said that this period in history, the medieval period in general, brought a lot of inspiration for all of his works, but specifically A Song of Ice and Fire. And so the Wars of the Roses is a really interesting topic. It's a really tumultuous time in English history. It's essentially like a 30 years long English Civil War for the crown. I was originally going to take you through it in terms of Game of Thrones characters, but that's not really going to work because there's no one-to-one parallels to Game of Thrones. Because the way that George R. R. Martin does it and what he has said previously in a bunch of different ways is, I don't make up the stories, but I take them, I file off the serial numbers, I change the color from red to purple, and I turn it up to 11. So
And he
it's
adds dragons.
yeah, so it's realism mixed with, it's historical realism mixed with fantasy.
I do like dragons.
It'd be a lot better if it had dragons, but
Yeah, honestly. If
they'll-
King Henry VIII had dragons, it would be a
It would
totally
be awesome.
different story. It would be
it'd
pretty
be
cool,
sick,
but
man.
it wasn't because there wasn't dragons in it, and he was just a piece of shit.
Yeah, and that's why his books are so good because he roots everything in these historical events, these real events that actually happened, where you read them and you're like, this is a crazy story. I can't believe this actually happened. And then he amps up the drama and he adds fantasy elements and there's like dragons and crazy shit. And so like
And
Ice
wieners.
zombies
Lots of
and wieners. There's so many
wieners and zombies. he said that he took a lot of inspiration from Tolkien because Tolkien does this. He roots in
He's the
historical reality. Yeah, he's like invented it basically.
He's the goat.
Just like we invented podcasting.
I saw
Yeah.
I saw an interview from George R. R. Martin that said a lot of the reasons that people don't write good stuff when they're taking inspiration from Tolkien is because they just take those tropes that he wrote about and they just like do the same thing over and over again. But really, they should take inspiration from how he wrote, which is like create these real worlds that are like based on real things.
Not everybody can take a ring and throw it into a mountain. It's been done by him.
Mm-hmm.
It's done by him, so you can't ever do that again. If you ever say the word ring and mountain in the same story, get the fuck out.
Yeah,
I mean,
you're about to get
people are
fucking
just gonna
sued.
be like, "Is this just Game of Thrones?" And then you, I mean,
No,
is this,
that's like-
fuck, I fucked it up already.
Oh god, get your fantasy stories series right.
Jesus Christ.
Is this a Court
so-
of Thorns and Roses?
Hell
I mean,
yeah.
fucking probably. But because there are no one-to-one parallels, I'm just going to
Is that
tell you the story. That's a book series.
ACOTAR, right? Is that's what
ACOTAR.
people call it?
A court
That's
of Thorns and
Avatar.
Roses.
It's the last Airbender.
No, that's Avatar: The Way of Water.
Oh, sorry.
It's the most recent Avatar movie. Anyway, because there are no one-to-one parallels, I'm just going to tell you the story of the Wars of the Roses. I will mention similarities as they come up. If you notice any while listening, that if you're like, oh, that sounds like a Game of Thrones character, shout it out. Let me know. But also, just generally, I think that if you are a Game of Thrones fans, as you listen to the story, you will really understand how, like, you'll see the themes and the events and the feel of the story, how Wars of the Roses coded A Song of Ice and Fire is.
I'm fucking stoked. I'm ready.
What do we call Game of Thrones fans? Throne heads?
Gotchas.
I like Game of
Gamophiles?
Thrones. I like the dragons.
I mean, if we're talking about George R. R. Martin specifically, we should
Railroad
really be
Martin.
calling it A Song of Ice and Fire because that's the name of the book series. Game of Thrones is just the first book in the Song of Ice and Fire series. If we want to get really, if we want to get,
Did you take your glasses off your brim of your nose and push them up?
if we want to
saying
get really
that,
pedantic
you
about it,
fucking
and
nerd. Oh my-
this podcast is nothing if not pedantic.
We're also not going to be talking about Game of Thrones fans at all, so we don't need a name for them.
Throne heads.
Thronies.
And Andrew,
Yeah.
if your
Thronies.
favorite part of Thronies, if your favorite part of stories is the dragons, you're going to be really disappointed because this
Son
is a
of
real
a
story
bitch.
and there are no dragons.
God damn it. Why am I here?
Okay, so
I mean,
here
and
we
this
go.
isn't really based on the part like the parts with the dragons is all the Daenerys shit, which is not I assume that the
show didn't do it justice.
well, no, what I'm saying is I'm sure that the War of the Roses influenced parts is probably the mainland Westeros shit and not so much the Daenerys shit, right?
Yeah. Well, I mean, he
I want
roots
it.
like every
You're my queen.
place. Oh my god. Every place in Westeros or Pentos or in any place in the books is rooted in a real place in some way or another. Probably 2 or 3 places mixed together. So like,
Mhm.
but Westeros is like the same shape as England. There's a lot of similarities. It's like this like bastard feudal society. So the Wars of the Roses. I'll have to give you a little bit of context before we start talking about it. Every time you talk about an incident, you have to talk about what came before it. So the ruling family of England for a really long time was the Plantagenets. The Targaryens. So the Plantagenets had grown and split into different houses. The 2 main factions in the Wars of the Roses that we need to care about are the House of Lancaster and the House of York. The Lannisters and the Starks?
Oh,
Ooh.
shit.
Oh,
I remember we
And-
talked about this a little bit in your
Yeah.
episode.
We did a little bit. And so it is between the Wars of the Roses comes from the 2 sigils or banners or symbols of the 2 houses, which is the red rose of Lancaster and the white rose of York.
Wait, the Plantagenists? Plant roses? Come on.
My
It's right
God.
there. It's
all
in the
coming together.
name.
It's so close.
And, the Lannisters are red and the Starks are white. There's some surface level comparisons there. Both of these houses were related to the monarchy through the descendants of Edward III. So the House of Lancaster, through John of Gaunt, was through the lineage of the 3rd surviving son of Edward III. The House of York is the descendants of the 4th son of Edward III.
got it.
Over time, both sides claimed that they were the rightful heir to the throne. So there was like uneasiness and tension between the houses because of, wealth and power. And while it really, like the Wars of the Roses really popped off later, the real context starts with the death of Richard II.
That kind of sounds like this podcast where he claims that he's the rightful throne of this podcast.
What does
Without
that even
me-
mean?
I'm just saying, without me, podcast does not exist.
Okay, all right. So Richard II was the King of England until he was deposed in 1399 because everyone hated him and they thought him unfit to be the king.
It sounds like Bo.
Sucks
He
to
was
suck, nerd.
Sucks to suck, nerd. He was the grandson of Edward III. So, of Edward III's firstborn son, also named Edward. So, Edward III, his first son was
Think
named
of new
Edward.
names. Jesus Christ.
Oh, you're going to get so mad, dude. Everyone in the story has one of 3 names.
Ugh.
Their son was his grandson was Richard. And when he was the heir apparent because he was the heir of the heir who had died. When Edward III died, he was next in line. He succeeded the throne at only 10 years old. So
I'm
because
going to say something
be
controversial. I
pretty
think
young.
that kids are probably bad kings.
you
They'd
know,
be all like,
Yeah.
there's a little bit of a
When's Transformers on?
there's a little bit of a theme of that through this story that you'll find. That when child kings happen, it's not great for the country.
I want to grow up to be a teenage mutant ninja turtle.
All they're doing is
Yeah.
watching Bluey the whole time.
Jack, are you
Kill
killing
him.
everything
yourself?
goes
Yeah.
kablooey.
They behead someone and it's just like da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da.
I love
The main
Bluey.
issue Bluey's such a good show, dude. So the main reason why boy kings are bad is because they have to be advised, right? This creates opportunities for older men, usually related to the king, to be in control and like actually wield the control of the king because the king is not able to. So that didn't necessarily happen with Richard II, but it did fuel into the reasons why these houses descended from other members of Edward III's family thought that they could rightfully claim the throne because they were like basically running the country during this time because John of Gaunt was one of Richard II's advisors. And like they're all very close, you know, in their patrilines or whatever the fuck. Richard III, he grew up to be an adult at some point.
Like
The-
most people do.
you
Like
know, at
most
some
people
point.
do.
The
Well, you know,
100 Years'
back in the
War-
day, it wasn't guaranteed.
Sometimes you don't. The 100 Years' War was still going on, which is the England's very famous war with France. He was not super into the war, even though his grandfather was super into it. And so he tried to end the war, which caused a lot of dissent among his advisors and like people that he tasked to rule the country. He also had a heavy reliance on a small number of counselors, which angered a lot of other people in the court and other nobles because they disagreed with this small like group of people wanted, and they thought he should be more hands-on and he should like listen to everybody and he should be more fair, blah, 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 blah. At one point, his governance was questioned and a group of lords actually lobbied and took power from him. Like they voted to
shit.
like take control of the government.
Okay.
One of these men who's important to know is Henry Bolingbroke. He's the son of John of Gaunt. And they were actually successful for a few years before Richard ultimately got that power back. And then he ruled, he was like, everything was kind of chill for like 9 years after that. He like didn't take any action against them until seemingly one day he decided that he actually did want revenge and he executed or exiled like basically all of the lords who had tried to seize power from him.
Nice.
I mean, let's be real. If we had that power, we'd probably do it.
See, the thing was though that people were like, why now? Like this was seen as a really tyrannical move because if he was going to get revenge, why didn't he do it immediately? Why did he wait a decade? So people thought that he was kind of crazy. Like there was accusations that he was mad, that people thought he was very unfair. They didn't like how he ran the country. They didn't like that he didn't want war with France. And so they were actually pretty upset that he would do this. So cruelly even. During this time, he also did classic king stuff, suppressed a peasant revolt,
Damn peasants, always revolting.
found out
They
about
need to
an
figure out something
assassination.
new to do. You know, like that's all they do is revolt.
Yeah.
Get
they're gross.
over it.
We-
Get over
We
yourself.
want food.
I'm
We want to
revolted.
live. Meh,
I'm
meh, meh.
revolted by these peasants.
The peasants walked in and he said, gross. He discovered an assassination attempt and he was able to avert it.
That means you're like a true king, though. If someone's trying to assassinate you, you know what?
You're doing right.
You do
Hey,
pretty good.
ah,
Yeah, like how we got our first hater comment from a rando.
Yeah, that's exactly the same.
Yeah, we are kings.
One of the biggest mistakes that Richard made that turned out to be a mistake from him is that he disinherited Henry Bolingbroke, the eldest son of John of Gaunt,
Oh,
Who was-
snap.
who was like, Henry was basically like, absolutely fucking not. Nah, fam, no. Raised his banners, got his little army together, rode it to the capital, and had Richard deposed. He and his forces went to like the parliament or whatever and was like, he doesn't deserve to be king anymore. I should be the king. Everybody should collectively agree that this motherfucker should not be the king anymore. And they all agreed. And they crowned
Anybody
Henry.
says they're king, not king. Oh, sorry, that was Game of Thrones quote. Good one, Poe.
Good one, Bo.
Good one, Bo.
And so
You
this
got it.
starts the reign of Henry IV. And so Henry IV is the first Lancastrian king because he is part of the House of Lancaster.
That's where I went
Oh,
to college.
Lancaster, Lannister, makes sense.
Makes sense. He
Makes
had
sense.
to deal with, he inevitably had to deal with some rebellions in the decade after his coronation. His former allies, the Percy family, who actually aided him in seizing the throne and in a few other battles, tried to seize power. And they met him at the Battle of Shrewsbury. They fought against their former ally. And in this battle, Henry IV's young son was wounded with an arrow. Does this sound familiar at all to you? It should. Henry, English Henry, wounded with an arrow.
Was a man
Are
named
you-
John Bradmore involved?
He was.
Are you talking about Game of Thrones?
Yeah.
No, I'm talking about
Oh.
Zach's former episode where he talked about the Broadmoor arrow extractor that removed an arrow
Oh,
from the
from the
face
dude's
of Henry
face.
V. So it removed
That's
an
this
arrow
guy. That's this
from-
guy.
Henry IV's son, who would go on to become Henry V. He took an arrow to the face, and they
Call back
extracted it during
previous episode.
during the Battle of Shrewsbury.
Please listen.
Well, I used to be a hero, but then I took an arrow to the knee.
To the face.
Yeah.
It's the face.
But he also that didn't stop him from being a hero. He it left him with a nasty scar, but like a ton of street cred, you know. Unfortunately, he did die pretty soon after that. Henry IV got to rule for 14 years. He died from a mystery illness, classic English medieval times. He's sick.
Classic.
I don't know.
They called what did they?
What?
What did they call it?
The illness that he got?
Yeah,
I don't know. He just died.
I found a list
They
online.
called it
of-
face arrowitis.
No, that's
I
not.
found-
No, his dad. The guy who got
Oh.
the arrow to the face, his dad is dead.
I found a list online once of like medieval England causes of death, and they're all bananas. Like the names that they called them. Like one of them was just like listed as wolf, and I was like, oh, this is how many people were killed by wolves. But it turns out that like wolf is what they called like wasting disease because you're like being eaten from the inside by wolves.
Wow, that's nuts.
I feel like that every day.
I'm constantly being eaten by wolves on the inside.
Yeah.
So he died of a mystery illness, and this left his son, who had taken an arrow to the face, to be crowned Henry V.
Good old face arrow.
Yeah, good old face arrow.
Good old face arrow.
Can you call him that for the rest of this so that we remember which guy you're talking about?
Sure. So face arrow,
Thank you.
Henry V,
Thank you.
was king of England from 1413 to 1422. He was, by all accounts, a badass king. He was successful in reviving the 100 Years' War with France. He conquered France both militarily and politically. He survived a fucking arrow to the face.
Mm-hmm.
He was
Not everyone
the
can do that.
No, a lot of people die when that happens to them. He was essentially the like type specimen for a warrior king. He was pious, he was brave, he was politically and militarily savvy. He was also seen as like kind of cruel, but like very steadfast in his convictions. So like people were fine with it. He's a king. He's supposed to be strong, you know.
Mhm.
He
I
fostered
assume
a
people
really
were like, oh, well, you know, like he's mean, but also, you know, he got shot in the face, so we get it.
and he's mean when he needs
if I
to.
got shot
you
in
know?
the face, I'd probably be a little mean too.
You know, he fostered a strong sense of English nationalism during this time, and he really positioned England to be a strong nation. In revitalizing the 100 Years' War and being really good at it, he also revived the English claim to the French throne. But unfortunately,
That's really turning it back on him.
unfortunately, he died only after 9 years because he got dysentery like an idiot.
Wash your hands, dumbass.
Yeah, you can survive an arrow to the face, but then you die because you got poop in your mouth? Like, come on, bro.
Don't eat poop. Just stop it.
Come on.
And if he hadn't have died, the Wars of the Roses, like, probably wouldn't. I mean, if any of this didn't happen, none of it would happen. But if Henry V, if Arrowface
That's
had
a nice
continued,
statement. If none of this happened, it wouldn't have.
it wouldn't have happened. But if Henry V would have survived and continued being a badass in France and like lived longer, then like who knows what would have happened afterward? Because the
Dragons.
reason that
It's dragons.
it could have been dragons, because the reason that when he died it was a problem is because he left a huge power vacuum because the crown passed to his 9-month-old son, Henry
Jesus.
VI.
That's too young. That's
Okay.
too young.
You're talking about like child kings? Like that's an infant king.
We went from a child king to a baby king. Like, that is a baby.
Like goo goo gaga. Off with their
Bitch,
head.
Yes.
I declare
even-
I want milk.
Milk for everyone.
Wah.
And binkies all around.
I call a festival of nummy nums.
Tummy time for everyone.
Babies don't usually like tummy time.
Oh, sorry.
No tummy time ever. Tummy time is canceled.
I decree naps illegal.
Only when I want to take them.
But if you're feeling
So-
cranky, go ahead.
This
Feeling
this
cranky.
left a huge power vacuum because obviously advisors had to step in to run the country because the king was a baby.
Yeah, who's
And
going to
this-
be the advisor
Cowards.
to the baby king?
Cowards.
And this,
Another baby.
again-
This is a separate baby.
Created opportunities for positioning to power, gaining control of the court, making alliances, that kind of stuff. And also, it was bad because the only reason that the war was going well was because Henry V was out there being good at war, making political alliances, commanding armies, winning battles. And so without him, the situation in France went to hell in a handbasket really quick because of a nice young lady you may have heard of named Joan of Arc.
Oh, shit.
What a fucking thorn in everyone's side, wasn't she not?
Wow.
Yeah, and without Henry there to help figure out the situation, they started losing battles. It was really bad.
Wait. So Joan of Arc fought against a baby?
Kinda.
The baby
I guess like
oppressed her.
symbolically.
Obviously, she would win, right?
Can I sidebar for a second?
No.
Yeah, what's up?
Is there a drag queen named Helena Handbasket?
Probably.
I'm sure there is.
Because
I am
there
so
has
sure
to
that
be.
there
There
is.
has to be. Please, someone, if you're listening, send me. I mean, I'm just going to Google it when we're done here or right now.
Yeah, fuck
but-
you. He's just gonna
if
Google
you
it right
listen
now.
to this podcast, you know Zach is already halfway typing that
I
sentence.
heard
into
him
Google.
clicking as he was saying it.
Helena Hand. Oh, yeah. There we go. Okay, great. Exists.
So things were tense under the baby king, but he
Well,
was
but-
ruled under advisors until he became of age. The situation was very tense, but people still believed that he was the king. He deserved a chance to rule until he actually did start to rule. And then they were like, actually, maybe this isn't great.
Maybe putting a baby in charge was not the best idea.
Well, he was an adult at this point, but
Oh.
they were a little less willing to put up with him when he became an adult because he wasn't particularly kingly. He was described as shy, quiet, overly pious, averse to bloodshed. He let his counselors take on matters for him in the government. He was very hands-off, like politics-wise, particularly regarding the war with France, which caused a lot of infighting and disagreements.
Like, you
I feel
guys
like
take
that would
care of
be
that.
me if I
I'm
was
gonna
a
go
kid.
hang out somewhere.
It's like, I'm just going to go read quietly somewhere else.
Yeah.
You guys can deal with this, right? You got this.
Yeah.
I did read one person say that this description of being pious could have been a reference to what they thought was like low intelligence. Like it was kind of like a euphemism, kind of like a
He's a-
bless your heart situation.
He's a dumbass.
Like, bless his heart. He's so pious. He's a
Oh,
pious
you
man.
dumb little idiot baby king.
Because you can't call the king an idiot, but you can say that he is overly pious. Despite England being at war with France and doing worse and losing a lot of momentum, one of Henry's advisors suggested that a possible way to ease the tensions would be to secure a marriage contract with France. And so Henry married the then 15-year-old Margaret of Anjou, a real Cersei Lannister type.
Oh, yeah. Tell me about it.
Instead of a dowry, he agreed reluctantly to ceding the province of Maine, which was a key defensive stronghold in Normandy, to the French. So he ceded territory that they held to the French in order to not pay a dowry to marry her. And him and his advisors that worked this out hid it for a long time because they knew that everyone would be pissed because, like, why are we fighting this war if we're just giving away fucking French territory? And they were. So tensions rose even higher after their marriage, and right after they were married, a lot of people were exiled or executed for treason or disagreement with the king. And a lot of people think that Margaret was the one that was pulling all these strings because we know that Henry VI wasn't particularly passionate and didn't really take much action in terms of the crown. And we know that Margaret of Anjou was very vocal about her opinions, and she came from a place and a life where she had grown up watching women rule effectively, outwardly as regents and advisors. Because France didn't have the same attitude towards women taking power. It was more acceptable in France for women to rule, but in England, it was like unheard of. Women had no power, and they hated women who like acted like men and seized power. So Margaret of Anjou comes over here, starts ordering people around, talking for her husband. And so off the bat, like, people hated her, and because she was French,
They're
obviously.
like, ew.
Mm.
What? Why?
They're like, this woman comes here? What? She talks? Ew. The biggest thing that caused the biggest rift was that they sent Richard, the Duke of York, a real Ned Stark type.
Oh.
They basically exiled him, but really they like forced him out of court and they sent him to go live in Ireland where he had a bunch of property, and they stripped away his military command.
I heard that was at the end of season 1.
At the end of season 1, they stripped away his military command, and instead they placed closer allies to themselves in these seats of power. And importantly, these people that they placed in these seats were not as closely related to the line of succession, if you know what I mean.
I don't.
The Duke of York had claim to the English throne because he was
Oh.
also related to Edward III.
Got it. Now I know.
So Henry's reign was actually largely pretty bad. Because he didn't do anything, there was a complete breakdown of law and order. There was corruption. There was military and financial loss. There was blatant and unpopular favoritism. And by the late 1440s, his mental state really started to decline, and he became paranoid. And the way that some accounts talk about it, like he had like mania, like he would like swing in these like mood swings, and he became really paranoid
King,
and manic.
you say?
Mm-hmm.
And this further sowed discontent and a questioning of his fitness to rule in both like the court with the nobles and the court of a public opinion. And in 1452, the Duke of York was persuaded by dissenters in Henry's court to come back, claim his place on the council, and like help run the country and right the ship because things were going badly.
Damn.
So the Duke of York, sent out his vassals and he raised his bannermen or whatever the fuck. And he raised an army and he rode to court. And there was a long standoff in London with the Duke of York making a list of demands and grievances. And it's a little unclear, like, what exactly happened, but it seems like the king initially agreed to the arrest of the Duke of Somerset, who was one of the people that replaced the Duke of York. But after they, like, calmed things down, the queen was able to intervene and, like, Somerset was not arrested, but instead the Duke of York found himself under house arrest and was made to swear fealty to King Henry and was left isolated politically again and was not able to make any significant moves.
That kind of sucks.
One of the reasons also is because the Duke of York had more power when Henry didn't have an heir, but Queen Margaret was pregnant. So an heir was incoming. So
Another baby king.
another baby was coming. The war in France continued on. Like things were kind of at a stalemate. Henry had managed to lose basically every territory ever gained in France over the 100 Years' War.
Henry, Jesus Christ.
It's a real chump move.
And in a horrible loss in what was the end of the 100 Years' War, essentially, Henry's armies lost the territories of Bordeaux and Aquitaine.
Everyone knows that those are the best territory.
Well, Aquitaine had been held by the English for like over 300 years. So this was particularly embarrassing that he
Ooh.
lost it.
Ugh. Ew.
I'm sorry to be you.
Henry.
After this all went down, only Calais was left as England's territory in France. This last loss in France really triggered Henry's mental problems, and he suffered a breakdown, and he fell into what is described as a catatonic stupor in August of 1453.
I feel like that constantly.
He remained catatonic and unresponsive even through the birth of his first son and heir, Edward
Holy
of
crap.
Westminster. Yeah, they're like, here's your baby, and he was just like, meh.
My question for this is, I'm so like, was he just like sitting there not responding to anything, or was he like straight up in a coma?
He was not like unconscious. He was his like eyes were open, but he wouldn't respond to anyone. He was just kind of like staring into nothingness. And I think he would like kind of move around, but like was largely bedridden.
The engine was running, but nobody was behind the wheel.
Would he react to outside stimuli?
No, not really. No. And so, oh my gosh, I have to cough.
Cough.
Just cough.
Get it
I
out,
have
baby.
been. I have been, bro. If my voice sounds weird, it's because for some reason I have to cough, even though I have a drink.
Just let them all out. Just cough really hard right now and let out all of the coughs, and then you won't have to cough anymore.
And I will not edit it out at all. It's like when Bo's eating soup. I will not edit out the soup sounds.
Don't you dare edit out the soup sound.
So people now think that he suffered from catatonic schizophrenia, which would explain his paranoia and his like mania and these like comatose catatonic like states that he would go into. There's some evidence that this was part of his family line through a couple generations. I think it was Charles II, like also kind of had these same symptoms. So that's what people think was going on now. There was also kind of some whispers and allegations of bastardry of his son and questioning of the paternity, because if he's catatonic and he's crazy, how could he have fathered a son? But Henry himself never doubted the boy's legitimacy. He always publicly acknowledged his paternity. once he did eventually regain consciousness. Spoiler alert, he did regain consciousness.
Was he like, what happened while I was gone?
Well, I'll tell you. With the king literally catatonic, the Duke of York finally had the opportunity to take power of the government. So he, along with a man named Richard Earl of Warwick, who is an extremely rich and influential man, they both together roused nobles and seized control of the government. The Duke of York was named Lord Protector of the Realm in 1454. He completely excluded Queen Margaret and her son. He imprisoned her closest ally in the Tower of London. Many of his supporters continued these rumors of like paternity and questioning if the son was actually Henry's. Apparently, Richard, the Duke of York, thought that he should be the heir to the king and not the king's son because of his claim to the throne through ancestry and the actions of Henry and how unfit Henry was to be the king, even though Richard, Duke of York, was older than Henry VI, but whatever. But most of the time, the Duke of York he didn't really have a choice other than to fix the awful financial situation that the country was in. So that's what he spent most of his time doing when he was Lord Protector. He was just trying to right the ship and stop owing a bunch of people a bunch of money. Around Christmas, 1454, that year, King Henry woke up, was like, what happened while I was gone? And they were like, he's the Lord Protector. And he was like, absolutely not. So he quickly removed the Duke of York from power, reinstated all of his previous friends and his wife's friends. And at this point, other nobles were like, we can't keep doing this, you guys. Like, what is going on? Like, people were getting really upset. So
that's one hell of a nap, dude. Like, straight up.
Yeah.
6 months, about a little over 6 months, like, you just, like, were unable to be reached. No voicemail box set up.
I'm not going to lie. I've done that. Like, I've deleted all social media before, and people are like, where the hell did you go? And I'm like, don't worry about it. It's
well,
fine.
that's not necessarily the same, because if you were to have a child during that time and your wife brought your child to you, you wouldn't just be like,
she's like, oh, also, here's Greg, your kid.
His name was Edward, excuse you.
Here's Edward.
Of course it was. And so you don't even have to ask, you don't have to ask the father what he wants the name to be. Like, you don't even have to discuss that. You know that it's going to be Henry, Edward, or Richard.
Yep, that's it.
So just take a 6-sided die, roll it.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Let's go. So in 1455, Henry VI calls a great council of the leading nobles. But the Duke of York was not invited. And it's thought that Henry was planning to punish the Duke of York's followers and attempt to end the Duke of York's claim to whatever power he had for good. The supporters of the Duke of York, mainly the Earls of Warwick and Salisbury, got word that this was happening. They let York know, and they raised supporters from all over, the people that the families that supported him, and they brought a force to London to support him, an army, essentially.
Real quick, the Duke of York, his supporters were called Dorkies.
The Yorkies?
Yorkies?
A bunch of little yapping pups.
The Yorkies.
The Yorkies. And so there was a standoff between the Lancastrian side under Henry and the Yorkist claim with Richard, Duke of York. And so they met at St. Albans, with Henry having around 2,000 soldiers and the Duke of York having around 7,000 soldiers.
Those numbers are different.
And also both smaller than I was expecting.
But it's not like the whole force of the army. Like, these are like small, like quote unquote small, but like just a fraction of their like most loyal supporters. And Henry was really paranoid at this time, so he didn't like really believe in like the military. Like, he had like a very small personal force that he supported, which didn't go great for him in the end. Now, this is an act of treason. To show up to the king with 7,000 men and to make demands and refuse to back down, but because they had so many more people, so many more nobles supported the Duke of York, and because he had led the country pretty successfully while the king was all fucked up, he was able to do this and like not be beheaded or whatever.
Well, if the king wanted to not have the Duke of York rise up an army to try and seize power from him, he should have tried not being catatonic for 4 years.
Yeah, what an
it
idiot.
was.
Did you
It
not think
was like
that
6
through?
months, but yeah,
You said it was 6 months,
duh.
right?
Oh, yeah. Okay,
it was
6
it was
months.
not 4 years.
Still.
It was a long time. And if you remember the last time that the Duke of York did this, it didn't turn out good for him. He ended up under house arrest and whatever. So he decided enough was enough. I am not going to be satisfied with a peaceful end to this conflict. So he launched an attack, and he attacked on 2 fronts. He caught the Lancastrian army with their pants down, not literally, although the main force didn't have their helmets on, a lot of them, because they were not anticipating active battle.
They had their helmets down.
Dorks.
He caught them with their helmets off, with their helmets down. One of the groups was led by his friend and the guy with probably the coolest nickname of this whole story, which is Richard of Warwick, the Kingmaker.
Oh,
Ooh,
shit.
Yeah. Hit me with that
The
Kingmaker.
Kingmaker.
Ah, like Kristen Cole in House of the Dragon.
The
Yeah,
Kingmaker.
Fuck Kristen Cole.
Fuck
That guy
Kristen Cole. I
sucks.
fucking hate Kristen Cole.
I haven't seen this show. I don't know what you're saying.
Season 2 was not good.
Oh,
I mean, it was fine. It was just so slow. Some cool dragon
giant-
moments,
it's a
though.
giant trailer for the season 3. That's all. It
Yeah, yeah, that's all it is.
Yeah. It's just being edged the entire season. And then
It's
I
called
don't-
gooning, sir. That's what the kids call it.
Yeah. Fucking Goon of Thrones.
is.
It was fucked
House
up,
of the
man.
Goon.
House of the Dragoon. It was right
Oh
there.
my gosh.
Hey, come on.
Anyway, so Richard the Kingmaker, he took a smaller force through back alleys and gardens and got to the center of town where the main part of the king's army was. And the fighting caught them like completely unaware. 2 of York's biggest rivals were killed. One guy, the Duke of Somerset, I think it was, he like was in a house and he saw all of the Yorkists coming at him and he knew like he was going to die. So he just went out guns, sword blazing, and he apparently managed to kill like 5 dudes before he was finally struck down, which is pretty impressive. That would make a good shot in a TV show.
5 out of 7,000, though. I mean, numbers aren't great.
Well, this battle wasn't like the worst battle. So anyway, they were able to outflank the forces protecting the king, and realizing that defeat was imminent, the king's forces like fled and allowed the king to be captured, and the Duke of York was restored to power. So they marched back to London. Richard, the Duke of York, was appointed protector of England. He didn't claim the throne at this time. He just wanted to be the protector of England and make sure that Henry couldn't fuck it up any worse than it already was. So
Okay.
this was the Battle of St. Albans. It was largely considered to be the first battle in the Wars of the Roses and the first in a long line of many bloody battles over the next 30 years in the English Civil War, known as the Wars of the Roses. This battle in itself was not particularly bloody, as only like less than 60 people were killed, but it was a major political victory for the Yorkist cause, and it was the first like real turnover of power since the other Henry took it from the other Richard. This time Richard took it from a Henry, last time Henry took it from Richard. Despite the fact that this battle happened, nobody was satisfied with the outcome. The people who supported the Lancaster side still supported the Lancaster side to the throne. The people that supported the York side still supported the York side. So, like, they were still fighting. There was still conflict. Tensions were still high. Noble families were fighting. Henry, who was, like, kind of a puppet at this point, but still technically the king, tried to make everybody reconcile. Nobody listened to him. It did not work. Fighting was breaking out all over the country. Military support was being risen. The Lancasters and the Yorks traded a couple blows, won a battle, lost a battle. The Yorks won the Battle of Blore Heath, but then the Lancasters won the Battle of Ludford Bridge. And in the Battle of Ludford Bridge, it was actually forces raised by Queen Margaret. They routed the Yorkist army so successfully that Richard, Duke of York, had to flee back up to Ireland.
Okay.
I was taking a drink.
Oh.
And while he was up there, he managed to raise more armies for more people that supported him. In 1460, the two sides met again at the Battle of Northampton. This time, it was a Yorkist victory. They won the battle. They captured King Henry again. This time, Queen Margaret had to flee with her son to Scotland. And during the time that she was in exile in Scotland, she never stopped raising money and soldiers for her husband and her son, what she thought was their rightful kingdom. And after the Battle of Northampton, Richard, Duke of York, made his boldest claim to the throne yet. He addressed the Parliament, he made his claim to the throne known, and, get this, he placed his hand upon the throne itself. And you guys didn't have a big reaction to that, but let me tell you, it was shocking.
Oh,
It's tag rules, isn't it?
It's tag rule. I touched it. No. It to touch
No
the
takesies,
king's
backsies.
throne and talk openly about how you wanted it was literally a shocking and overt gesture. There was probably a gasp in the room when he did it.
Hey, Bo, real quick, can you gasp for that?
yeah.
That was just like that.
Yeah. And honestly, the Parliament and the nobility were not prepared for this overt claim to power. They were like, oh, well, when you wanted to be Lord Protector, it was one thing, but now we would be usurpers and we're not ready to commit to that. So all of a sudden, the Duke of York was found without the support of the court. So a compromise was reached in the end called the Act of Accord, which officially changed the succession order. And it said that upon Henry VI's death, Richard, the Duke of York, would be his successor, and that Henry's son Edward would be disinherited.
Damn.
Do you want to guess how this went over?
Not
Poorly.
well.
I'm gonna say wars.
You would be right, because there was just more unrest and fighting. Like, people were like, this is the same thing that just happened. Like, I still think that the York should be king. I still think that the Lancaster should be king, and that his son should be the king. They kept fighting. So, like, what are we even doing?
I see why it lasted so long.
Right? Queen Margaret was in Scotland and Wales and using her connections to France to continue Henry's support with the Lancaster family. She raised money and army in support of Henry. She never stopped campaigning for the throne in the name of her husband and son. The next major key battle was the Battle of Wakefield in December of 1460.
My name is Wakefield. Sorry.
It's got a box full of your toys.
And this battle turned out to be pretty shocking because Richard, Duke of York, was killed at the Battle of Wakefield.
Oh my god.
The one who had tried to take the throne totally got.
How did he get killed?
Well, let me tell you, he was unhorsed, and then apparently
Oh, cowardly.
he was made to kneel on the battlefield, and a paper crown was mockingly put on his head. And then they beheaded him in the field,
Wow.
and his severed head was taken and displayed at a castle in York territory with the paper crown still placed atop it to serve as a warning against any further rebellious thinking.
I see the Game of Thrones parallel here.
Mounting
Sort
a
of.
head on a spike.
Yeah, well, sort of like, yeah, I guess not really. Never mind.
Well, what is the Game of Thrones parallel is that if this is Ned Stark, his teenage son was so angry, and this did not deter him at all. Instead, it made him and his supporters more steadfast. His teenage son, Edward, became the Duke of York. He believed he was the rightful heir due to the Act of Accord, and all of his supporters believe so. And so this is basically Robb Stark taking up to fight in his father's name after he is killed. So after the Battle of Wakefield, symbolically, Henry IV was restored to power. His wife and son were restored, like, technically. But Henry actually wasn't there. He had been taken by the Kingmaker down south, and he was still in enemy hands. And apparently, I'm saying apparently a lot. A lot of these, like, tales are hard to determine if they're, like, legend or if they actually happened. You know, they show up in accounts that are close to the time, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they're real, you know?
Yeah, so we'll just have a blanket statement here that sometimes things are apocryphal, and then you don't have to say
Yeah.
apparently.
And they may be embellished by people at the time or whatever, but it's said that the Yorkist forces who had been protecting the king while he was captured by the Duke of York when he was still alive, the king apparently promised them immunity because they, like, treated him with respect and they were just, like, doing their jobs. But after the Battle of Wakefield and the Duke of York was killed, apparently the queen asked her son Edward what fate the knights should suffer for their treason, and he replied that they should be beheaded. Despite pleas by their men and other nobles to spare them, he decided to kill them anyway. So this kid had real Joffrey Baratheon energy,
Yeah,
and
for
apparently he was a little mean and savage little shit, so the parallels are there. Edward, Robb Stark, Edward York, continued the campaign in his father's stead. He did extremely well militarily. He never lost a battle. He routed the Lancasters at the Battle of Mortimer's Cross, and it is said that as dawn broke on the battlefield the day after this really good battle that he did, there was a phenomenon that we now know of that we call parhelion, which is like a thing that, like a meteorological. Is that the right word?
Yes.
Cool.
Yes.
It's a phenomenon that gives the appearance of 3 rising suns in the sky. It's like a weird refraction thing. And so Edward used this as a symbol of his divine provenance. He was like, these 3
That's
suns
dope.
are the gods representing the Holy Trinity. This is them saying that I have the divine right to rule. And he took up the symbol of the rising sun as his, like, herald, as his banner.
That's dope as hell. I love that.
Pretty sweet. And it really inspired his men. After her victory at Wakefield, where she killed the Duke of York, Margaret continued marching south to meet Warwick and try and rescue her husband. They met at the Second Battle of St. Albans, in the same place as the first one. And Margaret's army was victorious, and they managed to rescue her husband from his capture. But her cause, people hated her. People didn't like Henry VI, and they were in largely Yorkish territory. So the citizens and, like, the towns around where they were did not actually like them. and they actually barred them entry to cities, and they had a really difficult time getting back to London. And because that happened and they were so delayed, this allowed an opportunity for Warwick and Edward, Robb Stark, with their supporters to ride to London, put together a council, and Warwick, the kingmaker, as the second most powerful man in the country at the time, crowned Edward in London, the Duke of York, as now the King of England, thus becoming Edward IV.
Damn. About damn time, right?
At least something is happening, like Jesus Christ. This left England in a really bad way, because now there are two kings. There's Edward IV and there's Henry VI. So surely this couldn't last.
I think everything worked out great.
Did you just say that there's multiple kings named Henry right now?
No, Edward IV and Henry VI.
Okay, that's what I was like, I thought one of them was an Edward. And I just heard you say Henry twice. So I think I might be stupid.
Edward IV is Robb
Nice.
Stark if he didn't die.
Okay.
Spoilers.
Is it spoiler?
I don't know.
Okay.
Statute
It's a
of
very
limitations
old
on that
book.
one.
It's a very old book. Edward was accepted as an attractive prospect for the king. I mean, literally, he was handsome. He had
hot
won
as
numerous
fuck.
battles. He was energetic. He had like really resplendent armor and these like heraldic suns. And so he was seen as like really strong. This was in stark opposition. Stark's like Game of Thrones. It was in stark opposition to Henry VI, his weak mental faculties, him being shitty at war, him being married to a French woman that everybody hated. Edward was in a better position. And to cement his rule, they continued to fight the Lancastrians. And the next battle that happened would be one of the bloodiest, or I think the bloodiest in English history, which is the Battle of Towton, or Toten.
Oh, this is where the roses come in.
They thorned them. This was a very decisive victory for Edward. It's said that about 28,000 people died at the Battle of Totten.
Jesus. That's more
All
people
Englishmen.
than in my hometown.
That's a lot of people. Like, geez Louise. Henry, Margaret, and their son had to flee to Scotland because their armies were completely decimated. And it was official. Edward was the only king of England, the new king. He allowed those who swore loyalty to him, who bent the knee, to be spared. They were allowed to keep a majority of their lands and titles. And in this consolidation of power, Warwick, the kingmaker, essentially became the most powerful man in the country, second to the king, but he always kind of had this like a little bit of power over Edward because he essentially put him on the throne. You know, he really helped him to get where he was. Margaret never stopped fighting. She led some armies into England. She was able to capture a few castles, but not able to hold them. 2 years later, in 1463, Yorkist armies under King Edward defeated a few more Lancastrian uprisings. They managed to capture Henry VI again. This time, though, they took him to the Tower of London and had him imprisoned.
Towers are pretty good for prisoning people, isn't it?
Is this guy addicted to being captured or what?
There's something
Well,
romantic about
like-
being stuck in a tower, you know?
Okay, Rapunzel. He was very, like, feeble-minded, and he was getting worse and worse as he got older. So, like, I don't think he was putting up much of a fight, to be honest.
They just put like a box out that said like for Henry, and he just like went under it, and they pulled the
Yeah.
string, and it just captured him.
They put a sausage on a plate and fanned the smell
He was
over.
like, "Ooh, piece of sausage. Ooh, piece of sausage."
There's a pie on a windowsill, and he just it turns
Or
out
they
that
were
it's-
like, "Hey, Henry, can you come here?" And he's like, "Oh, yeah, what's up?" "Oh, dang it.
Yeah, sure, random guy.
Again.
You got me. You got me."
Oh, you silly peoples.
At this point, basically, like, a fair amount of Lancastrian nobles that had any claim at all to the throne, except for Henry VI, were dead or they escaped the country. Margaret was forced to flee to France with her son, where they would live in poverty and exile for many years. You would think that we're getting close to the end of this story, but you're wrong, because things were not smooth sailing for Edward IV. In a classic Robb Stark move, he, against all advice, married, get ready to gasp, a commoner.
Bo gasp.
I did.
He married
Oh.
Elizabeth Woodville in secret.
Gross. Ew.
Hold on. My cat's dying. I gotta take care of it.
And her family quickly became very powerful and influential. And this was bad for two reasons. One, because Warwick did not know about the marriage for 4 months,
Oof.
was in France making marriage contracts and politicking it up. And then it was revealed that the marriage happened, and it made him look at best an idiot, and at worst a snake who was intentionally trying to deceive the French. Also, it was a great threat to Warwick's power because, remember, he's the second most powerful man in the country. He put this kid where he is, but all of a sudden, there's this large family faction of the Woodvilles because Elizabeth Woodville had 12 siblings, many of whom married into prominent families and were granted titles and wealth. And so now there's this whole family faction that he doesn't have under his thumb and that do not have his shared interests. And so Warwick decided, hey, I'm the kingmaker. I did it once. I can do it again for someone else. And this motherfucker defected to the other side.
Oh my God.
So he spent all this time fighting for the York cause. And then you marry one commoner. And he was like, nope, I don't like this. So he led a rebellion alongside some of his allies to take control of the crown. He was ultimately defeated by Edward and was forced to flee to France. Who else was in France at this time? His old enemy, Margaret of Anjou. Warwick was now working for the very man that he had helped to overthrow, Henry VI and his wife, Margaret. He literally completely switched sides. It's kind of a dick move, right?
Yep.
It was very ballsy to just think that they would be chill with that.
They were not chill with it. So King Louis XI of France arranged a deal between Warwick and Margaret with the objective to restore Henry VI to the throne. Henry had been imprisoned in the Tower of London for, I think, 5 years at this point. So Warwick and Margaret raised an army, set sail for England once again. They used the Warwick Classic, the two-pronged approach, to create a diversion and catch the king's forces off guard, and it was successful. Edward found his forces outnumbered. They sent in a distraction, and he sent a bunch of men north, and then they came in with their real force and caught him with like a smaller army. He sensed that defeat was imminent, and so he fled to Flanders, which is now part of Belgium, with a small number of his supporters in October of 1470. So
stupid, sexy Flanders.
I was going to say
Flanders.
I was going to say that.
Beat you to it, nerd.
I thought there was going to be a comeback to that. All right.
No, he beat me to it.
And so Henry VI was king once again, except for he was in the worst mental state of his life, essentially, except for when he was catatonic, because he had been imprisoned for 5 years.
Yeah, that'll change a man.
When you're already mentally fragile, like being stuck in a room with no one to talk to is not going to be good for you.
So now he's got the prison crazies.
Yeah.
Yeah, and like while he was in prison, like he was still, the highest noble. So he had like a nice room, he had lush accommodations, he probably had like books and stuff, but he was
it's like a Swedish British prison.
Yeah, it's like white people prison, like the guys who get, they get thrown in prison for tax fraud, but they can play pickleball every day. It was like that.
Yeah, but I mean, he was still essentially confined to one room, not allowed in or out. People were not allowed to really come and talk to him. He probably had a couple of servants, so it wasn't great. King Henry was a puppet more than ever before, and Warwick had control of the English government, because even though Margaret of Anjou had helped him get this seat, again, in England, women weren't regarded at all, so no one gave a shit about her. Luckily for her, her son was now the heir again, which was what she ultimately wanted, but still kind of sucks. But it turns out that reinstating a king who had been deposed a bunch of times, has been in and out of a catatonic state, doesn't really work in your favor. And Warwick was unable to control the infighting and the issues of the last fucking 37 times that this has happened. Like, we're doing the same thing again, you guys. You can't keep putting this guy on the throne. People don't like it.
We should do it anyway.
He did it anyway. And Warwick never once was like, well, because Warwick didn't have the same claim to the throne as the other people in this story. So he wasn't going to take the throne for himself. He was going to just hold it until Henry's son was old enough. But he didn't get that chance because Edward, who was in Flanders, raised an army. He came back into England. Warwick had to ride.
I'm beginning to see a pattern here.
Warwick had to ride out of London, and so Edward was able to swoop in, take the now extremely feeble Henry, and I'll let you guess what comes next. What did Edward do to Henry?
Throw him in the tower.
He threw him in the tower.
Did he just show up? He's like,
Get
hey,
in.
Ed. Hey, Richard. Long time no see.
You know what to do. Okay.
Also, it's Henry, not Richard, but
I mean, I'm just doing like a goof that he recognizes the guards, and he's like on first name basis with the guards. And Edward, Henry, and Richard are the only names that people are allowed to have at this time, apparently.
People who weren't in the royal family, they could be named Edmund. They could be named
That's
Edgar.
not really making the case.
They could be named Percy.
No, that's a name.
Edward.
Regardless, Edward. Fuck. He was imprisoned in the tower. And then the next battle that happened was a really kind of a sad one because it was a heavy fog and misty morning when these armies were meeting each other. There was really low visibility, and it had been raining all night. And
Evocative.
Edward's heraldic sun banner, and the biggest armory at the time was under the Lord of Oxford, and so Oxford's star banner were very similar. And in the heavy fog and the mist, the Lancaster army mistook Oxford's star banner for Edward's banner, and it attacked its own men.
Oh, that's like a double civil war.
It hurt itself in confusion.
There's a civil war within your civil war.
And to make matters worse,
Civil
bad
War
weather.
Inception.
oh my gosh, the civilception. To make matters worse, bad weather kept Margaret of Anjou's ships and her backup force from reaching the mainland in time, making it so that the Lancaster army had no backup. And so Edward was determined to win this time. He managed to take advantage of the confusion, saw these guys fighting each other, and just like decimated the Lancastrian forces. And he killed the Kingmaker in the process.
Damn.
A month later, Edward and his forces met Margaret's men that had finally made landfall at the Battle of Tewkesbury. And this was kind of the nail in the coffin for this era of the Lancasters. Their army was decimated, and the prince, Edward, not to be confused with King Edward IV. King Edward IV is fine, but the prince,
Okay.
Henry VI's son, was killed, and the queen was captured. The night that King Edward, arrived back in London, Henry VI, that was imprisoned in the Tower, quote-unquote, died of sadness after hearing of his son's death. Probably what happened is that Edward got tired of this back and forth, and now that his heir was dead, he just had him killed. Which at this point is like, finally, let's get away from this Henry VI era of putting this guy on the throne every 5 years, because it's going really badly.
Mhm.
It's
Margaret
weird.
of
He
Anjou
died
was
of
imprisoned.
sadness, and like sadness, that was the name of the sword they plunged through his chest.
Yeah. Oh, he's so sad that his son is dead. Also, he's bleeding to death. That's crazy.
Wow,
These
what a
things are
crazy
unrelated.
coincidence.
Margaret of Anjou was imprisoned, and one very important person who fled during this time after Henry died is a man by the name of Henry Tudor, who was warned by his mother to flee because she knew that this was the final straw for men with Lancastrian blood in England, and Henry Tudor was related to the Lancasters through his mother's ancestry. And so she sent him a bunch of money, and she was like, get the hell to France because you're probably going to die.
Get your ass to Mars.
Edward IV would go on to rule for 12 more years. He started as a Robb Stark, but he ended as a Robert Baratheon. In his elder years, he was more ruthless. His youthful battle energy waned as he grew older. He got kind of pudgy. He had a penchant for rich splendors, but not enough money to back it up. The crown was in hella debt to the Medicis. He owed them
Classic.
like $29 million. And to make matters worse, his brothers were a bunch of dicks and were feuding with each other, and it was making his job a lot harder.
Are the Medici still around?
I think there are some Medicis that are still around.
Wouldn't that be crazy to just like be a Medici in the year 2024?
That would
Are
be
they still
nuts.
rich?
Oh, I'm sure of it. Do you guys know who the Medicis are?
Did you play Assassin's Creed 2?
Catherine de Medici. Does that mean anything to you?
Means a whole world of me.
They're rich motherfuckers in Italy. They're part of
No.
like they've been a powerful family for a long time. They had the Bank of Medici. They had a lot of money. Blah, blah, blah. Prior to Edward IV's death in 1483, he named his brother. What do you think his name was?
Medici.
Henry.
I swear to fuck. Henry, Richard, or whatever the other one is.
It was Richard. He named his brother Richard Lord Protector of his 12-year-old son and his heir named Edward.
Classic.
But Richard, his brother, as I previously stated, was a major dickhead. And before Edward's son, Edward, could be crowned as Edward V,
God.
Before the Edwards, Edward was Edwarded.
I feel like I'm having a stroke.
I know.
before the younger Edward could be crowned Edward V, Richard declared his brother's marriage as invalid because he said that his brother had had a marriage contract to another woman before marrying Elizabeth Woodville, meaning that his marriage to her was invalid and that his children were bastards.
To a woman named Edward.
No, the women's names are Elizabeth or Anne or Margaret.
Oh, sorry.
Which is like a pretty garbage thing to say because marriage contracts were proposed and broken like all the time. So like this was quite obviously a power grab. So Richard had Edward V and his younger brother held in the Tower of London while this whole thing was going down. But after 1483, these boys were never seen again. Did Richard III murder his own nephews to take the throne for himself?
Yes.
It sounds like it.
Probably.
Most people agree yes.
It's circumstantial, but it seems pretty likely.
I feel like I'm most people right now.
Yeah. There was a chance that it could have been a plot by Henry Tudor or his mother Margaret Beaufort to make Richard III seem more evil, but that's pretty unlikely. What seems more likely is that he got rid of his nephews because he wanted to be the king.
That's rough.
Well, guess what? Probably killing your nephews and being an all-around asshat will get you.
Murdered?
Another person named Henry in your family?
Rebellion, baby!
Once more, Edwards.
People who thought that Edward IV's line was the rightful one did not want Richard on the throne. They were like, you can't just murder your nephews and be the king. That's not how it works.
I'm going to murder them harder now.
And he was actually, by all accounts, like not a terrible ruler if you ignore the whole nepoticide thing.
I just can't put it past.
Yeah. Never ignore
Nepoticide is a weird word, but
It's a weird. Apparently, it's the word for the murder of a niece or nephew.
Is it the same way? The same root as nepotism?
I think so. And so, this story ain't over yet, because this whole time, Margaret Beaufort, who was a descendant of Edward III herself, was protecting and advocating for her son Henry Tudor. She helped him with vast funds. She helped him with her political influence. She wielded power behind the scenes and under the table to raise an army and pay for it to challenge Richard's claim to the throne and put her son on the throne because he technically had Lancaster blood, even though it was through his mother. And the reason that his ancestors, that his grandfather Owen was actually knighted in the first place, may have been because he had an affair with the widow of Henry IV. It's a whole thing. It's very nebulous. Like, it was like a bastard who was essentially made noble, like legitimized, not related to the king, but he was related to the nobility through his mother, which, as we know, people didn't give a shit about, but it technically made him nobility, technically. He's got the blood. Margaret and Elizabeth Woodville, who was Edward IV's bride and the mother of Edward V, who was murdered, made a marriage pact that Henry Tudor would marry Elizabeth's daughter, also named Elizabeth, and they would unite the two bloodlines.
Jesus Christ, think of some new names, for the love of God. I'm fucking dying over here.
Because Elizabeth of York's father was Edward IV, a York, and Henry Tudor was part of the Lancaster. And so their marriage and their children would be uniting the bloodlines of the Lancasters and the Yorks. It would bring true a rightful and uncontested king of England. So,
do you ever think they got confused about these names? They're like, hey, I was talking to Henry the other day, and they're like, which one? The 100 other ones? What about Mary or Margaret? Like, oh yeah, pull out the list of these fucking names.
Well, all these nobility people had like 37 titles, right? Because they're like Richard, Earl of Warwick, Duke of Northumberland, fucking whatever the fuck. So it's like they probably were
that makes it more confusing.
They probably had Nick. Which Richard are you talking about? Are you talking about the Earl of Warwick, or are you talking about the Duke of York?
The Earl of Earl or the Henry of Kissinger? I'm so confused right now.
And is what also made researching this really hard, because everyone has the same fucking name. And all of these English place names sound the same. So it's like Somerset, Somerville, Warwick, Salisbury. And I'm like, I don't remember which one of these is which. So I had a really difficult time keeping it together. Anyway, so Margaret spent a bunch of time working in the shadows to fund her son's claim to the throne. She was actually got in trouble a bunch of times because she was openly supporting a Lancaster cause under a Yorkist king. But because she was a woman, she was able to be like, I'm sorry. Oops, I won't do it again. I promise I won't talk to him. And then she would send secret messages out and send him a bunch of money and do whatever. And she'd be like, oh, sorry, I didn't, oops. And at one point she was on house arrest and she still did it because she was like, what are they going to do to me? Like, it doesn't, I can do it. And she was very, very
Double
smart.
house arrest.
So Henry made a few attempts to make it to England. He faced some trouble, but finally managed to get all his ducks in a row and sail out of exile to England to face Richard. And he also would sometimes fly a red dragon banner. Maybe a Daenerys Targaryen trope.
Ooh. Dragon
Love me some
banner.
dragons.
That's pretty
Dragon
cool.
banners sailing
Love a
from
dragon.
overseas in exile to take back the rightful throne. And they met at the final battle of the Wars of the Roses, the Battle of Bosworth Field, which is a pretty cool name, I think.
Yeah. You love to see alliteration. I'm a big fan of alliteration.
Yeah, me too.
Are you?
Can I guess who wins this battle?
Sure.
Henry or Richard?
Oh, you should know which one. You should know which one wins based on his name
Henry or Richard?
versus
Henry,
Henry Tudor versus Richard III.
Yeah,
the
definitely
Tudors.
Henry or Richard won it.
The Tudors. Thank you, Bo, because Henry VIII is a Tudor.
Yeah.
Henry Tudor's army was outnumbered by Richard's, but there was
Andrew, how
one.
does this make you feel knowing that Bo is smarter than you?
Bo pays more attention than
I am gone right now.
Come back.
I feel like the catatonic king right now. Like I feel like I'm just staring into space.
Henry's army was outnumbered by Richard, but there was one key player who was yet to make his intentions known. And this was a man named Lord Stanley.
Richard. Oh.
It's a new guy with a new name, Stanley?
That's his last name.
Oh, God.
I didn't
What was what was his first name? Please fucking oh my god.
I didn't write his first name because it doesn't matter. He is Lord Stanley. He was a prominent and wealthy noble that had maneuvered himself politically to serve under these three different kings that have been in and out of power.
I swear to God, if his name is Richard or Henry, I'm gonna kill myself
I mean,
right
it
now.
probably is.
Live on the podcast.
Oh, that's good ratings. Do it.
Okay, hold
It
on.
was Thomas. It was Thomas Stanley.
Thomas
Oh.
Stanley.
Okay, crisis averted. For now.
Lord Stanley
That's an
was
old
really
friend.
good at knowing when to fight, when to swear loyalty, and when to
When to
stay the
hold
heck
them.
out of it.
No wind to run.
Know when to run. Yeah.
And when to just swear in general.
No
He just
wind to
was
Henry.
really good.
No
He's
win
just
to
really good at-
Richard.
Dropping a precision F-bomb in court.
Fuck. You say F-bomb, I say the fuck word.
Oh, edgy. Careful, we're
right?
going to get canceled.
The first ever podcast canceled.
Wow. And Lord Stanley was not friends with Richard III because Richard III was planning on reversing a proclamation by Edward IV and taking away a large portion of Stanley's lands. But also, after Lord Stanley's first wife died, he married Margaret Beaufort. So he was stepfather to Henry Tudor, who was actively fighting against Richard III.
What
This
are you
is kind of
doing,
getting-
stepfather?
This is getting a little twisted.
So it did not make Richard like Lord Stanley.
I get it.
And Richard was so worried about Lord Stanley lending Henry his support. He knew that Lord Stanley was not going to support him. Richard knew that. But in order to try and dissuade him from joining forces with Henry, King Richard took Lord Stanley's son hostage before the battle at Bosworth Field to be like, I have your son, don't try any funny business.
Did he throw him in the Tower of London?
I mean, maybe.
Seems to be a reoccurring theme here.
It's a good
Well,
tower. It's well
The
suited for
Tower
it.
the Tower of
Yeah.
London is where you put prisoners. That's where you put them.
That's what it's there for.
The Battle of Bosworth Field is happening. Henry Tudor brought his men. King Richard had between 7,500 and 12,000 men. Henry had somewhere between 5,000 and 8,000 men. Lord Stanley, who was at the battle, but not close enough to actually get in the fight yet, was Lord Stanley with about 4,000 to 6,000 men. So he had enough men and enough power to really change the tide of this battle, depending on who he decided to back, right?
Mm-hmm.
The battle went on for a while. Both forces attacked heavily. At one point in the chaos, Richard saw Henry Tudor on the battlefield, not accompanied by a large regiment. And so he saw this as his opportunity to end the battle right then and there. So Richard, with his forces, pressed forward. He broke through Henry's ranks, and he apparently managed to get within a sword's length of Henry.
Oh, that's pretty close.
Yeah.
It's very close. One swing of the sword, and it's all over. This is when Stanley decides to make his move.
Stanley.
He charged into battle right when he saw Richard getting close to Henry. He charged into battle on the side of his stepson and attacked Richard's army from behind. Very Sansa Stark bringing the veil into the Battle of the Bastards.
Oh, yeah.
And this gave Henry what he needed to kill Richard and decimate his forces. Richard III was the last king of England to be killed in battle, and Henry, crowned Henry VII, was the last king to be crowned via a war. Oh crap, I didn't write down the term. There's a term for taking inheritance or taking kingship via battle, and Henry was the last one. Henry VII was the last one to do that. So
Hey,
Henry
Bo,
was
what's
crowned.
the term called?
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah, that.
Yeah.
Ja.
What did you say? Did you say Björpa?
He said, "Blah,
Yeah.
blah."
No, I said-
Beer pong. So Henry was crowned on the battlefield as Henry VII, the first of the Tudor line, formally crowned in October of 1485, and the Wars of the Roses was finally over, other than a few rebellions that he was able to squash. Most notably the Battle of Stokefield, where he put down a final rebellion. And he basically killed all of the Yorkists. I mean, at the end of the Wars of the Roses, basically every single noble from the Lancastrian and the York sides were dead. Like, Henry was the last Lancastrian, and he was basically not Lancastrian because it was through his mother. But people were willing to overlook it because, one, they were tired of the turnover of kings and the bloodshed and everything, and they just wanted a period of peace. And they're like, this is good enough. You want it. You did it. Okay, great. You can have it.
Holy
And
shit.
so that ends the 30 years of English people fighting each other for the right to rule their country. And now I think that really, like, if you look at the story and then you think about the Henry VIII episode, you can really see why Henry VII and then Henry VIII were like so dead set on having a male heir and making sure that their lineage was secure, because they came off of the Wars of the Roses when shit was changing hands all the time and you never knew if you were going to survive or your son was going to be murdered by his uncle.
Yeah, and then he wanted
Yeah,
to stay
for
in
real.
power too and just murdered everybody.
Yeah, well, then, because then there won't be anybody to take power from you.
Exactly.
Well, I mean, it wasn't that Henry like murdered everybody. It was just that in the course of the battles and these two noble houses fighting each other, everyone was dead.
There's only so many people around, you know?
In the Game of Thrones, you either play.
You either win or you die.
I forget what it is.
And then in 2017, they found the remains of Richard III in a car park.
What?
Yeah, they found his body. It was
How did
a
it-
very long.
How did they know it was him?
It was a couple of
Did he have a
different
nameplate?
things. Yeah, it said he was holding a note that said, "I promise I'm Richard III." No, they knew that it was him for a couple of reasons. Hold on, let me pull up my notes. It was like crazy. Like the way that they found it was nuts, because it was like a bunch of scholars who were like looking at maps because they knew like where his body had been thrown, because he was like killed and then his body was stripped naked, and then they like kind of mutilated it a little bit and humiliated him and like drug his body around, as you do, you know.
It's a goof.
And then they buried him in some like monastery. And so it was a bunch of researchers trying to find the like active location of this monastery, because it was kind of lost to time. They ended up doing it. And then through both genetic testing and like the records of where they knew he was buried, and they knew that it was the same spot, they determined that it was him.
Damn.
They did they tested. So he got murdered in battle and then dumped in this grave, and then eventually somebody made a parking lot over it.
Yep.
Classic.
That's the
And
way I
then-
want to go.
And then a bunch of researchers were like, oh, okay, so like we know that this is the site of where this was, and like the whole thing makes sense. And it was like the Finding Richard project was like a whole thing. And yeah,
Yeah.
so they were able to use DNA evidence and genealogical research, and then they looked at the like osteological examination of the bones.
And he had
they
like a
fa-
clubfoot or something, right?
Well, no. So it was painted in history, and Shakespeare painted Richard III as, and it was probably Henry Tudor as well, to like bolster his claim to the throne, you know, that Richard III was like a mutant tyrant, like Tyrion Lannister. Like he had a clubfoot, and he was hunched over, and he was gross and ugly, and like that's why he didn't deserve to
He
be
was a
king.
fugly slut.
Yeah, exactly.
Shakespeare's words, not mine.
He didn't have like a clubfoot or anything when they found his bones, but he did have pretty bad scoliosis.
Just like me.
So he probably did have a little bit of a
oh
hunchback.
my god. Yeah. I'm looking at the bones now. This dude's spine looks like a fucking question mark.
Yeah, it's a little fucked up. So he probably did have like a weird hunchback, but it was probably like really exaggerated, like in terms of his physical disability, just to paint him as the villain in history. But you know how your spine is supposed to be an S back to front? Well, his was an S side to side.
Yeah, that's horrendous. Ooh, the base of the skull had a gaping hole where a halberd had entered.
Yeah, they stabbed him in the back of the head.
Nice.
Nice.
And so that's fun because they were like,
Did you guys look at the picture of the skeleton?
I don't.
I did.
think you-
it's fucked up, man. His spine's, his back hurt probably really bad.
We were just talking about how much back pain sucks.
Yeah. Imagine this shit. And then getting stabbed with a halberd on top of it. Woof.
I mean, at that point, you don't have to worry about it anymore.
Yeah, he deserved it. He killed his nephews. So.
Yeah, good point.
And so, yeah, that was the Wars of the Roses. What did you guys think? What was your favorite part?
When the sunflowers took over the
God.
roses.
I think that if there had been more names involved, I would have been able to follow it a little bit better. But ultimately, pretty classic stuff. A bunch of backstabbings, a bunch of people being like, I'm the king, no, I'm the king, betrayals, revolts, a guy named Stanley, but that was his last name. Pretty good. I'm into it.
My least favorite part was the Henry and Richard part,
Don't forget about Edward.
and Edward. My favorite part was the dragons.
There was no dragons, so you didn't like this
There
at
was
all.
a dragons on a banner.
Oh, okay.
boom.
Okay.
I
all
was
right.
listening.
Lawyered.
But what about you?
The whole story. A lot of Edwards. It's like a bunch of betrayal.
Big Edward
fool,
fan.
That fool getting back in that tower again. What an idiot.
What an idiot. Fucking idiot.
They captured Henry VI like 12 times.
Yeah, my favorite time when what's his face? What was his name?
Edward?
Richard.
There's a
Richard?
good chance you're going to
Henry?
get it right.
No, it was the guy who was the advisor,
Stanley?
and then he switched sides. And he was
Warwick.
Like, yeah,
the
Warwick.
Kingmaker.
The Kingmaker. I thought that was funny.
Ash, what was your favorite part of researching this?
I really liked the paper crown mockery. I thought
Uh-huh.
that was
Or when
ruthless.
When that guy touched the throne and everyone was
I
like,
really
oh my
liked when that guy
God.
touched the throne and they're like, oh my God.
He booped it. He booped it.
He booped it. I really just liked learning about Margaret of Anjou and like how she was able to do all of this stuff, even
Mhm.
in a place where she wasn't like allowed to. I didn't like when he murdered his nephews. That was fucked up. And I also really liked learning about Henry V. He was kind of a badass. It's sad that he died of dysentery, like a dummy.
You live, you laugh, you
Just
love,
don't eat poop.
you shit yourself to death.
You
Just
don't
don't eat
wash your
poop.
hands and you die.
Don't eat poop.
Don't tell me what.
Oh my God. Well, hey, thanks for listening to Get Richarded On, the Info Edward Henry podcast.
Get dicked on,
Yes.
because Dick is a nickname for
Old
Y-
Dick,
yes.
Ed, and Hank.
Richard.
Thank you for listening to this episode about the War of the Roses. This was a doozy brought to you by Ash. These ones are some of our highest rated episodes.
Hey, I'm
so I
glad
assume
it's a
that
doozy.
this
instead
one's
of a
rocketing
smoothie
straight to the
like
top.
Zach's.
Or a dookie, because then you get dysentery.
Yeah.
God, it's Zach right
Anyway,
there.
thank you for
Really
listening.
listened.
If you'd like to listen more, keep listening to this podcast
If
where you
you're-
already are, and
if
just
you were-
hit the next button.
If you're interested in the next phase of English history and you haven't yet listened to the two-parter on King Henry VIII, do that. And if you
What the
like
fuck are you
English
doing?
medieval history,
Go listen to it,
Yeah.
idiot.
Those were good episodes.
Oh no, Angel's attack.
dude, more people listen to part 2 than part 1.
That's weird.
I don't understand. You
That's a
guys,
weird
if
thing.
you are listening to this podcast and you listen to part 2 of Henry VIII and not part 1, so much good stuff happens in part 1.
Yeah.
Like all
The fuck
like
are you doing?
really good stuff. So you should
You're
go
not
back and
gonna have
listen
any
to
idea
that.
what's going on.
Yeah, it's a weird back. It's like watching Terminator 2 before Terminator 1. It's like, where'd this Terminator come from? I don't know.
Yeah.
Better figure it out.
Why is this woman in an insane asylum?
Why? Who is this Termin and why is he aiding?
Exactly. Anyway, you can find us on getdumpedonpodcast@gmail.com if you would like to send us an email about the War of the Roses or, just any other names. Just send me a name that's not Henry, Richard, or Edward. Just single word email. That would be fantastic. Or you can find us at Get Dumped On Podcast on the Instagram.
Edard, as in Edard Stark.
Is that
I
way?
threw you a Thomas at the end.
It's true.
Yeah, just a pity Thomas.
Here's a Thomas.
Here's
I'll
a
take
Thomas
it.
for your feeble mental faculty.
I'll take it at this point. All right, we'll see you next week, every Wednesday. Hump Day, Dump Day. See you later.
Okay, bye. I hope you like this. I hope you like this
Okay,
episode. Okay, bye.
bye.
Bye, 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 bye.
Ash and Zach are super smart. They went to college and learned a bunch of stuff. And Bo and Andrew didn't go to college because that's just the way happens when you put them together and you try to make them learn. Grab your friends, let's listen together on Get Dumped on an Info Dump podcast.
Edward, Richard, Henry, Edward, Richard, Henry. I'm gonna go kill myself.